Okay, go.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Modern Forager Stories. I'm Kristen Blizzard. I'm here with my husband Trent, and we are so excited to bring to you tonight Eleana Sue from Shared Cultures. Welcome, Eleana.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'll jump in and just kind of introduce you two for everybody here, and kind of give a little bit of background. Am I coming through okay there? I think I am. I think it looks good. Yeah, we met in Soma, and gosh, that was January, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the Sonoma County Mycological Association. I don't know if there's a county in there or not. And they put on this wonderful camp full of mushroom enthusiasts of all makes and sizes. And we met Eleana there, and she was presenting on making koji, and we sampled a lot of her products and kind of hit it off. And it's such a exciting technique of preserving food through fermentation with fungus or fungi, and she is going to talk about this mold fungi and tell us how it works today, and I think really just give us a workshop on how to make this. And at the end of it, I hope we know enough to make some soy sauce, maybe especially some miso, and whatever else you teach us. Now, before we turn it over to you, Eleana, let's just run through a little bit of house cleaning here. Welcome everybody. If you have been on one of these webinars before, you know we have a chat. This is a great time for all of you participants to say hi on the chat and tell us maybe who you are and where you're from. And it's okay to talk with each other here. Kristen especially mans the chat, and we'll try to answer questions. We also have a Q&A, and you can pop questions into that, and we will try to answer them. We're live on Facebook, so I'm going to try to watch the Facebook feed and see if any questions come in that way. But I think other than that, we're kind of ready to kick it off. And Eleana, I guess maybe if you could start and tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do and how you got into this. And somewhere along the way, we'll throw in some totally shameless plugs for your products that people can buy.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. So my name's Eleana. I got involved with Koji about a year ago, and it actually started with my love of mushroom foraging. Actually, last year, a year and a half ago, I was living in Palo Alto, and I was working a job that I wasn't too particularly happy with. And, you know, I was a little depressed, and I would start just hiking every day in the woods. And it wasn't until one morning that I actually stumbled upon the mushroom that Trent's actually wearing right now, the Chanterelle, underneath an oak tree. And it actually found me more than, you know, I found it, because, you know, I was just hiking every day to kind of get out of my funk and get, you know, a little endorphin and serotonin in me. And I found this whole patch of Chanterelle mushrooms. I had no idea what they were. I went to the Palo Alto Library immediately after my hike, and I did a little research and realized that they were edible. And from there on out, it was kind of like, oh, I have to find more mushrooms. And then it evolved to wild plants, and I was collecting miner's lettuce, I was collecting wild onions, I was collecting, you know, all sorts of things in the wild. And then it turned into, okay, well, what am I going to do with all this stuff? You know, because it's so much fun hiking and collecting all these things. But, you know, it's like you have a surplus of items. And the first book that I actually bought to kind of educate myself was this Katz's Art of Fermentation book. And he really taught me the basics of, lacto-fermenting and things like that. And he has a whole chapter on koji. And I remember reading that section, and everything just kind of came full circle to me. I couldn't believe that, you know, koji was a mold, and it was a mold fungi. And and the mushrooms were really the thing that kind of got me into this journey of foraging and then fermenting, you know, the excess. And then here I am reading about koji, you know, a fungi that basically drives a method of fermentation. And from there, I kind of just entered this rabbit hole of diving deep down and trying to, you know, figure this out. So that's kind of how I got started with koji, and, you know, really just being motivated by my love of foraging and, fermenting and then putting the two together, it just seemed like the perfect thing for me. So.
And then what year did you really start doing this then, the fermenting part of it?
I would say a little bit over a year ago. I would have to kind of look at my Instagram post. If you go on my Instagram is @sharedcultures, and I haven't deleted anything since I started that account. And if you go all the way down, you can scroll through and see, when I first started my journey, and when I was trying to grow the koji, and I was hopping on social media asking people for help, and really trying to figure out like how to grow this thing, because there wasn't a lot of resources out there other than, Reddit, and there were, a few blog posts about it, but I really felt kind of helpless. Luckily, Nicole Novak here in the Bay Area, she was the one who really introduced me to it, because I had read about it, and then she had shown me at a Soma camp. Or actually, it wasn't Soma Camp. No, it was at the San Francisco mycology. No, it was Soma Camp. It was a Soma Camp 3 years ago. So 2 years prior to when I met you guys. I had started mushroom hunting, and then I met Nicole there, and she was the one who brought some koji that she grew on elk steaks, and and then she invited me over to her house, and she really helped me kind of. I felt like she was the only resource really, other than some other blog posts and things like that, to help me like guide me through the journey. So.
I grow mushrooms and spend a lot of time on the Facebook groups about mushroom growing, and I've never heard a peep about koji in there, or this particular species of fungus and preservation. Can you talk a little bit about like the history of it? Like where does it come from, and is it everywhere around us and we didn't notice it? Because Kristen and I are fairly plugged in, I think, and it was like when we tasted your
Yeah.
products and kind of put 2 and 2 together. So what's going on here? Where did it come from, and why haven't we seen more of it?
Yeah, so the history of koji was actually, there's some debate whether or not it came from China or Japan. I'm Chinese, so I like to think it came from China. There's some, and really there's arguments on that it really came from Japan, but really I think because the Japanese were just so good at perfecting it, and they're also so good at taking meticulous notes. But the rumor is that it actually started in China, where the wild fungi would just propagate on beans, and a Chinese monk was taking had fermented some beans with koji, and he would bring it to these Japanese monasteries in the form of food, when he was traveling, as a way to kind of have something to eat with his rice. And when he brought it to the Japanese monastery in Japan, they had an excess of soybeans. And then they decided to make miso with it, what we commonly know as miso made with traditional soybeans. So that's kind of the history of koji. And, I've also been reading that they have found that koji in archaeological digs in these old rice fats, where you could see that there was alcohol fermentation in it. And it's believed that, traditionally a lot of the koji or koji was used to make water more drinkable. They wouldn't turn it to alcohol all the way, but they would, make it slightly alcoholic so that the water felt more purified to drink. So
make it safer to drink.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely.
What about here in the U.S.? Or is there much of a kind of a koji scene?
Actually, so in the U.S., it's starting to now. There's a new book that recently came out called Koji Alchemy that I have bought. It's written by Rich Shih and Jeremy Umansky, and they're kind of like the pioneers of koji fermentation in the U.S. There's actually a section in the beginning of the book that explains why koji hasn't really been so popular in the U.S., and mainly that's because of trading regulations. I can't remember, they cited something regarding how there are a lot of trade laws, and once people were getting these beans and rice over, it was like, wow, we have all this excess of food, and we don't really need to ferment anymore, especially with this Chinese or Asian mold. But Jeremy and Rich have written this book, and there's really been a lot of talk about koji because of its enzymes. And when we figure out how to harvest those enzymes, it's so powerful because you can speed up prosciutto fermentation. And instead of aging a meat for a year or so, you can get it done in a few months. So that's been pretty cool.
So whoa! You mean, just for everybody to be clear, not only do we do soy sauce and miso paste out of soybeans, but now you're talking about meat.
Yeah. Koji is a live, and you grow the koji and it secretes all these enzymes. It doesn't have a stomach per se. It's like a little fungi. It doesn't have a stomach per se. So what ends up happening is it secretes these enzymes to break down the substrate that you basically inoculate it on, right? And then from there, all those enzymes start breaking up the proteins and and those become amino acids, which, then, you're talking about, A, it's better for you, but B, it's more delicious because amino enzymes, basically translate into umami.
Yeah.
And, the best part of it all is it's just you can use lower cuts of, cheaper cuts of meat or meats that are more tough, or even foods that you might necessarily think are waste, and turn that into an otherwise, a value added product.
Can you, what else do you put it on?
Here
we go, down the rabbit hole.
What don't you put it on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I first started with just making some traditional misos, and I'll show you guys later down the line kind of the steps on growing koji and how to do that. But I first started off with just a traditional miso, and from there you start thinking what if instead of soybeans, right, what if you have stale bread or leftover bread? And bread has a lot of starches in it. So, this is what I call bread so, or it's like miso, but instead it's just bread. And this has been going since last year in June. And, and I've kind of eaten some of it already, but basically it was just stale bread that I mixed in with koji. And it's kind of like a sweet, like a bread paste, almost like, I would say like a pate, but it's just made out of bread. And it's really good on like celery and, vegetables where, you're trying to not maybe eat so much bread, but you want more vegetables, and I'm using that as a spread. So, I try to use koji in ways like that to minimize waste. Also like butternut squash, for example, if you have a lot of older vegetables that you have at home that are kind of, a little soft or just not looking 100%, what I like to do is I like to roast that vegetable and then turn that into, what we would call a miso really is just an amino paste. So for example, like we've been selling some of these butternut squash misos, and these are butternut squash that I got from the farmer's market. The farmer sold me a big container of butternut squash that was essentially going bad. Not like bad, but it's a little soft, it's wrinkled, it's been carried around a few too many times. And, I just stuck in those butternut squash seeds, stem, skin, everything.
Really?
Just cut it in half, roasted it, mixed it with koji, and the koji's enzymes broke down all of those starches, and it became a very, very sweet miso. And, I also added a little bean in there just to kind of give it a little bit of a protein boost, because koji really has two main enzymes that we're concerned about. One is protease, which breaks down proteins, and then one is amylase, which breaks down starches and converts them to sugar. So when I'm making a product, I like to try to have a little balance of both. So I'm having a sweet and a savory kind of taste. I've made things with just mushrooms, for example, that are just high in protein, and it's very umami. But I've also made things with, something that you guys everyone probably has familiarity with is like a sweet miso. If you go to the grocery store, there's often white misos, and the difference between a white miso and a dark miso is really that the white miso has more koji in it. because
Oh.
because there's more koji rice. What ends up happening is the starches in the koji rice break down and turn into sugar. So it's very sweet. But if they add a little bit more bean in it, it becomes what you would traditionally know as like a traditional miso, which is more savory because of the proteins that are.
Oh, so miso can be made from rice or beans in this case,
Yeah.
or bread. So
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
any product.
Anything that has starch or protein, even it works.
Can we call it a miso at that point? Like the butternut squash one, is it cool to call it a miso? Are people gonna,
Yeah, I've been calling it a modern miso because I think it just has a better like understanding to it. Most, in the book of Koji Alchemy, they really refer to it as a amino paste. In New York, David Chang of Momofuku, he calls them, oh, I can't remember what he calls them right now, but he calls them something else. So everybody has a name that they call it. But, modern miso for me is what I've been using, and it works, so.
So we have like, what, an hour and 15 minutes or so. Do you think, can you walk us through the whole process of kind of what you do and kind of how that process goes? Is that a good thing to start now?
Definitely. So,
Okay.
Before I start showing everyone how to do this at home, because it's totally attainable, I'm going to just kind of show you guys where it all starts. And it really just starts from a pack of spores. So similar to mushrooms. So these are spores that have actually been diluted with some rice flour. And the reason why we dilute it with rice flour is the spores are really light. So when you're sprinkling it, you want a little bit of weight to kind of, weigh them down onto your substrate. Another reason is because the rice flour provides the koji, it coats the koji spores immediately and gives it an instant like food. As soon as it hits your substrate, it might be trying to find the substrate or trying to break through the rice, your rice kernel, your wheat kernel or something like that. But by coating them in rice flour, it has an immediate food source. So, that's kind of what I like to do. So when I get the spores, I disperse them in flour. And if anybody's interested, you guys can reach out to me via email afterwards. And I can sell these for $5 and just send them out to you if you want to try to propagate them yourselves. So so I start with the spores. And from there, I typically get some rice, or I would start with rice because it's the easiest to do. And traditionally what they would do is, you would take your rice and you would steam it. And so they would boil, you would go and get a hot boiling, boil some water, then put some bamboo baskets or, some steaming baskets or steaming trays on top, and put a sheet cloth in it, and then put your rice and steam the rice. And the reason why they would do that is because when you steam rice, what ends up happening is that your substrate isn't getting completely soaked through all the way. And we're concerned with our substrate being too wet because koji likes, like mold, or, if you think of tempeh or any type of mold, even mycelium, when we're thinking about mushrooms, they want to be able to kind of grow and spread their wings or spread their mycelium around. And when your substrate is too wet, what ends up happening is that it simply can't penetrate through the ridges and the grooves of, either the soil, or it can't penetrate through the rice or the wheat. So traditionally it's been steamed. However, there are other, it's a lot of work to steam rice. So what I've been doing is I've just been putting it in a rice cooker. In the book Koji Alchemy, Jeremy Mansky, who wrote the book, he does this thing where I've seen him do it actually. He bakes the rice in the oven. So he puts all the rice in a hotel sheet pan, covers it with plastic, and then heats it in the oven. And that's just his way of being able to cook a bunch of rice, at one time in the oven. So you could do that, or you can, this book also, another book that I have here is written by a Japanese guy. He talks about the traditional way, but then he goes on and says that he's microwaved rice several times. He just throws in the rice in the microwave and does it. And so it's like, yes, traditionally we want to steam it because you get perfect koji. You have koji that's grown all throughout the rice kernel, because a steamed rice kernel is going to be hard on the outside but soft in the inside because it hasn't been boiled. But what I like to do is I just like to throw it in the rice cooker. And my trick is that once you put the rice in the rice cooker, all you have to do is make sure that the rice is just a little bit above the rice. So you're kind of like parboiling the rice. And then or par cooking the rice in the rice cooker. And I like to keep my rice cooker on warm after it's done for about 20 minutes afterwards. So as soon as, that little thing goes ding and it says it's on warm, what I like to do is I like to lift the lid up and just quickly stir it, because usually the rice on top is still not cooked yet. And I flip all the rice to the bottom, and then I put the lid back on and then let that sit there on warm for 20 to 30 minutes before I take it out.
So that evens out the moisture through the rice, but it has less moisture because you started with not the full amount of water. If we were eating the rice, we would cover the rice with an inch of water or something.
Definitely.
Did you say the water comes up to the level of the rice, or is just above it or below it,
just
or
barely?
It's just barely above it. It's just barely above it. And so that's a really, really easy way. I've done all of the ways, and I was just like, this is the easiest way. The only caveat is sometimes if you're not waiting that full 20 to 30 minutes and you're in a rush and you pull it, your rice is just going to be a little bit grainy. And so your misos or, all your ferments might have residual kind of little rice pieces in it. So you kind of want to be cognizant of making sure it sits that entire, 20 to 30 minutes afterwards. But it's really, not as bad as, steaming the rice and doing all of that. I think the rice cooker is much more accessible and easier.
That doesn't sound very painful. It sounds pretty easy.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I prepare my substrate in terms of rice. Of course, if you're cooking soybeans and things like that, for soy sauce, I would soak my soybeans an hour a day before, just to really make sure that I'm getting all that moisture in the soybean. And then I would boil the soybeans for about 30 minutes, well, I would with the soybeans, what I do is I soak them the night before, and then once I put them on the stove and it starts to boil, the moment it starts to boil, I time 30 minutes on a boil. And I watch it, because soybeans just tend to or any type of beans really tend to kind of like boil over. Yeah. So, and so that's kind of like how I like to prepare my substrate. Yeah. And what's actually really interesting, kind of related to this, but not really, is that what I find really, really interesting about all of this fermentation stuff is that when you really think about it, fermentation is a way for us, or way in the past of conserving energy. When you think about boiling soybeans or things like that, it could take 6-7 hours of just straight up boiling soybeans so that they're edible and delicious and soft to eat. But with fermentation, you can cook the beans, for 30 minutes to an hour, and then just brine them and mix it with koji. And what ends up happening is you get a really delicious product that's been naturally cooked, through enzymes over time.
It sounds like a lot of the flavors come from just the rice, the soybeans, the koji. Do you add other flavors to this, or is the flavor building based on what else changes the flavor profiles in there?
Yeah, it's just the enzymes just doing their work. So like in a traditional miso, for example, it would just be koji rice, soybeans, sea salt, and that's it. And thyme, I guess, 4 ingredients. And it's just really, when you really think about the soybeans, for example, it's like, wow, it's such a I wouldn't say a boring bean, you know, but it's really bland on its own. And it's so interesting that it could turn so umami over time. And it's really the enzymes that kind of, you know, all those alive enzymes breaking up those proteins, just cutting them up and then breaking those down and then turning it into amino acids, which then turn into umami.
Okay, so you've got this really this substrate is what you're gonna add your koji to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to let that sit for a while?
Yeah, so after, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab a sheet pan that I have going in my incubation room right now. And
Okay.
I will show you guys the incubation room, but it's a little it's a little messy. We're reorganizing because we wanna try to build shelves because the ferments are really getting out of control at this point, and we need to kind of leverage vertical now versus, you know, what we were currently having with just, you know, ferments, you know, on shorter shelves and then like buckets of soy sauce on the floor. So I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
So cool.
You know,
What about just the mushroom, the Aspergillus? Where does it originate from?
I wonder where you get the spores from.
I don't know.
You know, there's people that grow in the mushroom groups that grow cordyceps and lion's mane and things like that on edible substrate so that they can consume mushroom substrate as a medicine. And it's really what I think what we're talking about here. We were just wondering, Eleana, while you're bringing that out, like, do they fruit? Where do you get the spores from?
Yeah, and where does Aspergillus naturally occur?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I get the spores from gem cultures right now. I've also ordered some from Japan before, but with Japan, you really have to get a big order to come in because you have to pay like the currency exchange tax and all these things. And, you know, I ordered it once and then, you know, and then I was like, wow, that was really expensive. So until I really go full big, I probably won't do that. So I'm getting them from gem cultures right now. And they're getting it from Japan and they're getting these big orders. And for gem cultures, you can probably get a starter pack for about $40. It comes with quite a bit of spores. So if you guys, you know, anybody that's wanting to try to grow your own koji at home, you guys can always just contact me and start off with a small little starter kit. There's only 9 spore producers in the whole world, and they're all based in Japan,
Wow.
which is really, really interesting. And they are generational companies, people that have, you know, really figured out how to capture this and kind of grow it in laboratory conditions. And the reason why they grow it in laboratory conditions is because, I mean, what we can do is, you know, we can grow the stuff on the substrate, we can let it go to spore, and then we can collect the spores and technically, you know, recolonize a whole substrate. But there's so many other wild spores in the air that it's really likely that something might get contaminated. So I just prefer to buy the spores clean and outright. And as far as, you know, it being in the wild, there is Aspergillus in the wild. Mostly they thrive in more humid conditions. I read a little bit about this, and the only really information was, you know, in Asia, it seems that it likes to be, it's in the air in the hot, humid climates. And then in Sandor Katz's book, The Art of Fermentation, he actually refers, or he talks, there's a koji section, and he talks about how he has tried successfully to grow koji with using corn husks. So apparently fresh corn husks have Aspergillus Oryzae on them. And that's the only thing I've found regarding that. And I haven't tried it just because, you know, when you're trying to grow, you know, that would just be a project. Like I would have to go get really fresh corn husks that haven't been transported, you know, around. I would probably want to try to harvest that in a field, not like through the grocery store or when it's exchanged too many hands, you know, because I'm not sure of the contamination, where it's found in the wild, and why, you know, why I just prefer to use fresh spores. So yeah.
All right.
Okay, so I went to go grab my substrate. So this is Koji rice that I've had. I don't know if you guys can see, but this is rice that's been inoculated just yesterday. And what I do is I put them in these sheet pans here. And actually Trent has some photos of some things that I showed him or sent him yesterday regarding the different stages of Koji growth. So you can kind of see that it goes from just rice on day 1, and then 12 hours later, it looks like there's little white, there's like little whites. So it's, day 1, you've sprinkled the spores on hour 0, and hour 12, it starts to get this, you know, powdery thing, you know, kind of looks like Koji. And then 24 hours, it really looks coated, but by 36 hours, it's completely a matte. And I have some fresh Koji here that I can show you. And what I mean by matte is it's really a matte, you know, like the rice is fully just completely caked in mycelium.
Yeah.
Which is really, really, really cool.
That's quite fast for that to happen, actually, it seems. I mean, compared to kind of watching Trent do what he does, that's pretty quick myceliation time.
Yeah, and that's
36 hours.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest reasons why I enjoy it so much. It's like, A, I love fungi. B, is just cool to grow something that just, it's kind of like instinct in the you know, in today's age of like instant gratification, but still trying to appreciate slow foods. This is something that is instantly gratifying. You know, I do it, the next day you see results pretty much immediately, and then the day after, you know, midday, you open it and it's ready to go.
Is that ready to eat, what you just held up right there?
Yeah, so you can eat the Koji. It's Koji is actually a prebiotic, which means that it's not a probiotic. So prebiotic meaning that when you eat the Koji, it feeds all the good bacteria in your gut. So it acts as a food for the good bacteria. But after fermentation, if you use the Koji to ferment things, that's when it becomes a probiotic, because what happens during fermentation is it pre-digests all those, you know, all your goodies, like your beans, the rice that the Koji is growing on, making more nutrients biologically available to your body when you eat it. So probiotics then are like the live organisms that come from that, that add to the, you know, that become basically the good bacteria in your gut.
So that rice that you just held up, that's that really like the precursor. You're expanding the Koji onto the rice so that now you can put that into a fermentation with your kind of vegetables of choice or starch of choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, so once I basically sprinkle the spores onto, you know, I've cooked the rice. Once you cook the rice down, and then you sprinkle the spores on. Actually, after you cook the rice, you want to kind of just wait a little bit till the temperature drops to like about 90 degrees or 95 degrees. Otherwise, you're just going to like send the spores on to immediate death, you know, because it's so hot. So I like to wait a little bit. You usually get like a little temperature probe or something like that, and put that in, you know, check the temperatures, and then sprinkle the spores when it's not super hot. And then I like to put a towel over it. And what I did was I rigged an incubation chamber using an old wine fridge I found outside of, actually found this outside of Randall Museum in San Francisco. We have our San Francisco mycological meetings there every month. And, you know, I'm telling you, the fungi they just find me. It's like all these, like, I'm like, oh, I was looking for an incubation chamber. And all of a sudden I get out of a mycological meeting and there it was. an old wine cooler. And, what we did was we tore out all of the wires inside, and we just bought a reptile heating lamp, that I got on Amazon. And then I got a little humidifier, something that you would, buy on Amazon for your desk or when you're feeling a little sick. I found the smallest one that would connect. Basically, it's like a plug-in. And then I put that in the wine cooler with my Terranium heat lamp. And that's what I use to grow it. And we have a temperature control thing. It's called an Inkbird temperature controller. And what it does is you plug the humidifier in one outlet, you plug the heating element in another outlet. And if it gets past 95 degrees, it shuts off because we don't want to overheat it. So it's constantly monitoring the temperature inside. So, that's kind of, how I do it. But, of course, if you're at home and you're not looking to really invest a lot of money right on in the get-go, if you have a bread proofer at home, my friend Mario, who's actually here, hi Mario, he turned me on to a bread proofer. So when I was first starting out, he was like, "Oh, you should grow koji in this bread proofer." So if any of you guys at home have a bread proofer, really good place to do it because it keeps it hot and moist in here. So that's kind of how I started growing koji in the beginning, just using this bread proofer and using two these pans that fit perfectly one on top of the other. And what I do is, because there wasn't a stand that came with it, so I put one on the bottom of the bread proofer, and then I got just one of these wire racks, and then I could just lay that on top with a towel. It stays on, and then I could stack another one on top, so I could kind of double my yield. If you don't have a bread proofer at home, you can always use hot water bottles. So I've actually tried this too, and it works pretty well. So this is like just, it's actually my mom's. It's like just a hot water bottle when you have kind of like a stomach ache. So I've used this on the bottom of my koji tray, just like right here on the bottom, and I wrapped a towel over it. And then I just made sure that this was hot all the time. I would change it every, few hours, just really hot water. And then, I would always have a little temperature gauge in there just to make sure it stays within the temperature range.
What's the temperature range you're looking for there?
Yeah, so koji needs 86 degrees to 95. At 86 degrees, you're really encouraging the growth of protease, which is the enzyme responsible for breaking down the proteins in beans. So if you're trying to do like a miso, for example, something with high protein breaking down powers, you want to do 86. So if I wanted to like make a marinade for a meat, I would grow you could even just grow the koji at 86 degrees and smother it, just basically break it up and rub it all over a nice piece of meat or a lower, really tough piece of meat, and just really tenderize it. So that's at 86 degrees. At 96 degrees, you're really looking to encourage the growth of amylase, which is the enzyme responsible for breaking down starches and turning them into sugars. So for example, like sake producers typically grow their koji at 96 degrees because they want all that sugar freed up in the starch, which then gets converted into alcohol. And I've read that you can also grow koji at like 75, 76 degrees, just a few degrees, or just another 10 degrees lower than protein, or getting the protease, because at around 75 degrees, what ends up happening is koji produces something called lipase, which is an enzyme responsible to break down fats. I haven't necessarily done that because I haven't really fermented with a lot of fatty things, but I think that in in the biotech world, you know, even when we're not talking about food, we're talking about, you know, a lot of biochemistry that involves, you know, harvesting enzymes to do whatever these companies need them to do. And so they've used Koji to do all of these things more on a technical, you know, technical scale.
So if you're going to get into this, I guess the first thing is you're going to be able to get a lot of different flavor profiles based on the temperatures you run your fermentation at. And it sounds like having a way to control that temperature is going to be a secret to having a reliable or a good product, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're first starting off, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I mean, who's to say like an 86 degree and a 96 degree or 75 degree? It's like, as long as you've successfully grown Koji, there's going to be enzymes in it no matter what. There's just going to be a little, a minute difference of a little bit more of one enzyme than the other,
Okay.
right?
So don't worry too much about it. Don't like.
No. And I just like to stay at 86 degrees because I think when you're first starting, 86 degrees is a great temperature because Koji actually generates a lot of heat when it gets going. So once it takes off in 24 hours, what ends up happening is all that, there's so much energy happening because all that mycelium is starting to really build and everything's getting excited down, you know, on the substrate, and all that activity generates heat. So sometimes, you know, when I heat it up at 95 degrees and I'm not paying attention, you know, what ends up happening is it overheats. And when it overheats, your substrate essentially starts to liquefy. So all of the rice, you know, starts to liquefy, which actually it's not great because you don't really have Koji anymore. But what you have there is what I would call, because what ends up happening is all that starch basically disintegrates into sugar. So now I basically have Koji sugar water, which is a hack on, you know, mirin, you know, so I would use that to maybe season you know, some sushi rice, or use that to cook in soup. But it's not something that I would use to make miso with because it's so liquidy that it's just, you know, it's just not good. So.
Okay. But so far, when we've been talking about running these temperatures currently, you've been talking about on the rice as it runs through the rice in the first day and a half.
Yeah.
Are we ready to then take this rice now and put it into something we want to ferment?
Yeah.
Is that going to be in the same temperature guidance?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I guess I'm thinking the temperatures you're talking about, are they for the rice when it runs through the rice and for the fermentation process as well?
Okay, got it. So when you're first growing, so no, the answer is no, because what ends up happening is when you're done growing your substrate, you would just leave your ferments out. Depending on where you are in the world, if you live in a really, really hot place, what ends up happening is if you live in a hotter climate, your fermentation, your ferment is going to basically accelerate because it's really, really hot. And so in that case, I would recommend maybe putting more salt into your ferment to kind of slow down the microbes and calm them down so that you have a more even fermentation process resulting in a better product, because it takes time for these flavors to develop. So if it's sped up, what ends up happening is, you know, your ferment cannot taste, it probably won't taste as good because it's not developed.
Okay, so I guess we're going to take the rice then and ferment in a different vessel. Here's what I'm thinking about. Like, I have a bunch of asparagus that we've harvested, and would that ferment up nice as a vegetable?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, because so what you want to do is, so after you have your rice, you would typically combine it with beans, but in your case, you want to do asparagus. That's totally fine. The only thing that you have to be thinking about with any type of vegetable that there's not too much water. So fresh asparagus, for example, has a lot of water. And when you're introducing too much water to your ferment, make sure that other bacteria isn't growing in there. Or what you would do is, you know, what I would do with asparagus is I would roast it, or I would dehydrate it. Roasting actually is a great way to really just bring out all of those flavors, those caramelizing the flavors, and even a little burning, creates some Maillard effects, which is really, really tasty.
Uh-oh. I think we just lost you.
I would combine that with the, uh-oh.
Oh, you're back.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, and I may have jumped the gun there. I'm thinking about asparagus, but we probably should continue on the straight and narrow, simple recipe.
No, it really doesn't matter. I actually have something written down here for everybody if they want to take a look at it. But when we're talking about our ferments, in terms of like misos, you know, I don't know if everyone can see, but like, you know, really a miso is like an amino paste, right? So, oh gosh, it's really hard to tell, but I have these other two things, which is shiokoji, which is another thing. So maybe we should just ignore these two for now. And we just look at the short-term misos. Really what we're concerned about is, you know, the koji, it's even parts of koji, and then salt, 5 to 10, I don't know if this is maybe helpful or not, but what I'm really trying to get at, these are all just proportional ratios of different things. So, you know, you have your koji, you have your salt, and then you have your starch, and then you have your protein. And this is all ratioed out. And I can actually send this to you guys so everybody can look at it after the call. But the whole point is that, you know, instead of soybeans, you know, you just want to make sure your starch here, which is going to be your asparagus or your squash or any other vegetable here, is equal amounts to your koji rice. And then if you want to hold it at a short-term ferment, you know, you would do like a 5%, right? But if you want the flavors to really develop over time, you would do like a 10 to 12%. Or 10 to 13%.
Eleana, we have a nice write-up from you with some recipes and directions.
Yeah.
Maybe we can add that to this document right after the meeting, and I'll send out an email to all the registered attendees. With that in it. You can take a picture or whatever. And for those of you on Facebook, you're just going to need to follow the link or register. We'll figure you out too. And send that out. So we'll make sure, Chris and I, as soon as we wrap up, we'll talk with you and we'll get this out to everybody in like 45 minutes from now.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so what you held up was like just the general guideline. We take this rice, we combine it with a certain amount of starch, some salt. What do you do? What do you do that in? A big bucket, your bathtub?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, you know, you can do it in a variety of ways. The easiest way I think that most of everybody has at home is a jar, right? Everybody has a mason jar. It doesn't have to be a ball jar. It could just be like the jar you get after eating a whole bunch of pickles. And I save all my jars. So what I like to do is I like to, you know, get the koji rice, get the salt, get the beans, mush it all together. And then I mash it in a bowl, and then I put it in the jar. I shove it in the jar. And then from then on out, what I like to do is you have to weigh your ferments so that, you know, making sure that all that air is gone and everything is compressed. And in this way, no other things are likely to get in here. With fermenting these types of pastes, you want to make sure that there aren't any air pockets, because air pockets have, there's a likelihood of other things in the air that kind of are trapped in there that might grow unwanted bacteria. So I shove everything as best as I can in here. And my trick is, instead of getting these weights, you know, you can actually just get garden rocks that I boil down, and I like to just stack them in here. That's like a really cheap way to do it, with just rocks. But what I have here in the middle is saran wrap with a bunch of salt that I have.
Oh.
I don't know if you guys can see, but it's a bunch of just coarse salt that I shoved. Basically, I wrapped a whole bunch of coarse salt in saran wrap, and I put it in the jar to seal it. And that way the salt also makes sure that, you know, it kills anything that wants to go in there.
It's like a filter.
Yeah, it's like a filter. And then I put, like, you know, my weight on it. And, you know, when I first started fermenting, I went online and I bought all these like expensive, this is.
Oh, I think we're losing you again.
I started out with those jars, and then is that better?
Yeah, Eleana, I think we lost you briefly.
There you are. Well,
Okay.
Yeah, looks like you're back.
Probably my connection. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're doing okay though. You weight it down with rocks or those glass things and the salt. That totally made sense. Do you want to continue that thought? And then I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
From the audience. Okay.
Great. And then, you know, if you want to go bigger, you can use these food safe plastic containers. Put all your stuff in here, put, you know, saran wrap on top, and then put a bunch of rocks on it. Or, you know, you can also just, if you have, you know, I got this at a garage sale, but this is a beautiful crock that I sometimes make special misos and stuff in. So you could use one of those too. So, yeah.
Okay. So let me feed you a few questions here coming from the audience. I'll go back to some that were asked a little bit ago. One person asked, what species of Aspergillus is Koji, or are all the genus of Aspergillus classified as Koji?
That's a great question. There are many different types of Aspergillus. Something that most people think about when they hear of Aspergillus or when they think of mold is, of course, the black mold that we typically get on our bread if, you know, we're leaving it out and things like that. And so that's actually called Aspergillus niger, which is not very good mold. That can make you sick. So with Koji, there's different types of Koji. The ones I typically work with is Aspergillus Orzae, which is more of a general Koji mold. It produces pretty much like an even amount of enzymes throughout. So, you know, you can use it to ferment beans, you can use it to make sake. You know, it produces amylase, lipase, and protease pretty much at normal, like at even amounts. And if you manipulate the temperature, like I previously mentioned, sometimes you'll get more of one than the other, right? But there's also another one, like for example, for soy sauce that we make here. Soy sauce, I use a different type of strain. I use something called Aspergillus Oryzae. So it's Aspergillus Sojae, and it looks exactly the same when you get it. I actually have a packet here. Well, I'm not going to open it, but it looks exactly like that packet of spores that I was showing everybody earlier. But it's just a different type of strain, and it's been genetically kind of grown, or, you know, babied, and to produce more of protease, which breaks down the beans in soy sauce. So it, you know, every type of, there's different types. I think, I don't remember, but I think there's like over 100 different types of Koji spores, and some are only, not all are available to the public. A lot of them are actually kept they're bred by these biochemists for like I was talking about like earlier, for technology and science, because they're trying to really harvest the enzymes, and it's all proprietary information on how these enzymes can break up certain things and speed up whatever they're interested in doing.
Yeah, more the biotech world than like the home kitchen or
but
traditional kitchen.
Yeah, but in terms of if you go on Gem Cultures and you buy like their starter kit for $40 to $45 plus shipping, they have, I think it comes with 5 different types of of spores. I actually have a few packets here. So, like it'll come with this light rice one that I was talking about. It's more of like a general one. And then it'll come with like a barley one that really breaks down barley really well. And I can't find the other packets lying around here, but I have one more here. And then this one's like the one for soy sauce, so that breaks down soybeans really well. So there's different ones for different applications if you're really trying to kind of hone in on it. But when I first started, I actually this is really old. These are like 2 years old and they're still working for me. But I just keep it more as just to look at it. But as you can tell, I've used up all the spores. But I really generally just like to use this light rice koji starter because it's such a generalist strain that I find it does well in everything. And then when I started making the soy sauce kind of more professionally, so to speak, that's when I really started using the soy sauce one, because it really just breaks down the soybeans and the wheat really well together. So then I bought this. So yeah, there's different strains for whatever you're trying to make, really.
For different flavors. Okay, good. We still got a few more questions here. In fact, I think we have more than when we asked the last question.
Okay.
They multiplied. One's from Chef Julie Schreiber is on here. Do you remember Julie from Soma?
Yeah, she makes the most amazing dinners. Oh my gosh, I'm still thinking about her meals.
I can't say enough about her cooking and oh my gosh, her recipes. We'll talk about that in another day, Julie. I'm excited you're here, but Julie asked a question. Do you have issues with hydrogen sulfide? She continues, because that's not the question. The question is, do you have issues with hydrogen sulfide when you ferment vegetables?
Hydrogen, I don't even know what that is. So I'm gonna have to look that up real quick.
Yeah, I think it's something they put on grocery store vegetables to preserve them. Probably not something you get at the farmer's market. Julie said nope. I'm totally wrong.
Yeah, we're totally wrong.
Yeah,
Julie.
So Julie, go ahead and type it in there if you've got we'll come back to your question, but it doesn't sound like we have an answer. We don't even know. Oh, no, I wasn't even close. Sorry, Julie. She said it's the smell of an overcooked hard-boiled egg. It's SO2 is sulfur dioxide. H2S is the smell. So I guess she's asking, does it smell when you ferment?
No, it never does. It with koji, at least, it always smells really, really good. And that's because I don't know. I don't think it's like anything that really has to do with like, when you're lacto fermenting things and then you kind of let it go too long. And even lacto fermentation, it's more the lactic acid. It's like a sour smell, but it's kind of like a healthy sour smell. But I've never had any issue with sulfur smells in any of my ferments, even with
that'll be a relief for Kristen, because a lot of my hobbies smell. She doesn't like that. Let's see. Michael Lynn said we got a sample of the cashew miso and tried it on a cracker, and it reminded me of pate. Is this common with fermentation on nuts?
Oh yeah. I think maybe with just that one per se kind of it's actually like a play on vegan cheese, because when I was really exploring that ferment, if you go to any grocery store and you're looking at the vegan cheese aisle, a lot of it actually has miso in it. which is really interesting. They use miso as an ingredient to make their vegan cheeses. But I thought, you know, why put soybeans in there? Why add a bean element to it when I can just kind of use the cashew nut, you know, as a way to really, you know, just make it a more refined product per se.
So just for everyone else, you have a cashew miso that you also sell at the farmer's market and on your website, sharedcultures.com.
Yeah, so we're actually just, we're selling right now just through, if you just email me afterwards, I can send you a list of everything that I have. This is actually the cashew miso that everyone's talking about. We're actually switching over from plastic to jars very soon. We had initially started with a bunch of plastic, and you know, once we get through this, we're going to switch over to jars. But this is I'll open this up real quick, but this is the modern miso cashew, and there's only 3 ingredients in it. It's just koji rice, or we use organic koji rice, organic cashews, and sea salt, and that's it. Just 3 ingredients, and it's really a complex flavor, and it's so interesting because it's like, you think about it, it's like, wow, just 3 ingredients, and you're able to achieve such a complex flavor through fermentation. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Adam Boggs has a question. He asks, can you add ginger, garlic, turmeric, or other flavors to a miso, or just use those as the primary thing for fermentation, as in a ginger bug or fermented garlic?
okay, yeah. So I personally haven't done that yet. In Japan, they have something, I can't remember what it's called, but basically they ferment all of the food scraps after miso has gone through. So like after a miso has been fermented for a few months, what you can do is you can pull that and then put your spices and things like that into the mix to give it a little bit more flavor. And the reason why I say that is because turmeric and those spices might not have a lot of starch in it. So when we're thinking about koji fermentation, we really want to make sure we're having a good amount of protein and starch so that what you're tasting is really delicious. And then you can add all of these other spices in towards the end to kind of give it an extra boost. But if you're just doing, ginger, because ginger is really fibrous and things like that, or, all these spices, I don't really know if it would help the koji kind of do its magic, because there's not enough starch, there's not enough protein for it to really break down and give you anything really good. It needs to really feed on something. Once it starts feeding on something, that's when I would add in all my spices and things like that to the mix. So I'm actually working on that right now. I had a friend from New York. They have a great company called Burlap and Barrel. They do single origin sourcing on all of their spices. And I'm working on trying to put in some of their spices into some of my misos. For example, you would think of cinnamon. Cinnamons are really, really, everyone knows cinnamon, but what about a sweet cinnamon miso? Something that we could use to spread on, apples for dessert. But I would probably add that cinnamon on later after my beans have fermented, and then add the cinnamon in and let that go for maybe a few more weeks just to give it that flavor. But the cinnamon's, the spice isn't really going to feed the koji, right? Like it should come in towards the end.
Okay. Boy, if you would start a miso club, I would totally join and get my shipment of miso once a month. I'm just telling you, I will be your first customer, and you can throw in a little soy sauce for me too.
Great. That sounds
boy,
great.
and the questions are piling in here. Rhonda over on Facebook is asking where to get the koji starters again. Can you say that a little more slowly?
Yeah.
Gem
so
cultures?
It's called Gem Cultures, GEM Cultures. You can also just send me a DM if you want to just get started on a lower investment kind of thing, where I'll send you some spores for $5. I have some for shoyu right now that I can divvy up to folks. And then I also have a general one that's more, like the light rice one that I was talking about. That's more of a general kind of starter. But if you'd like, you can also just go on to Gem Cultures for $40 to $45. They'll send you a starter kit where you have basically, I showed you just, one of these packets that it comes in.
I'm just going to jump in there. I'm going to jump in there and interrupt you and recommend to everybody to reach out to you, and let's support Eleana on this. And if we can order through her, I think that would be super cool. So I'm just going to say that. Yeah. Let's see. The next question is, can you make hot sauce with koji? That's from Beth.
So hot sauce, so that's actually something we are actually thinking about working on. And that's when basically I would make the sauce and then I would add the peppers towards the very end and then let it go for another month. That's kind of, with all of those things that don't have a lot of starch, that don't have, too much substance, you really want to just throw it in at the end, but you want to make sure that your base product is good before you go and do that. So those are that's experiments that we're also working on, because we've had requests for hot sauce.
Okay. I think this will be a quick one. Anonymous attendee is asking about salt and how much salt to add to keep other bacteria and microbes out. I'll answer part of that and say we're going to shoot out the email afterwards that has some specific recipe guidance in it. Can you just try to nail that question though?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I'll send out this thing that I wrote prior to the call here, but typically for shorter term misos, you could do 5%. For longer ones, you can do 13 if you're trying to hold it for a year and really let those flavors develop. What I like to do overall is about, I would say, I sometimes do 8% if I'm trying to really speed it up, but I've had times where I do the 8% and something goes wrong, like I didn't add enough salt to it, and maybe it was too hot in the room. I've had a time where it got really hot and then 8% was just not enough. I've done 5%, but that's when I'm trying to do a miso for 3 weeks and it's done at 5%, but I'm constantly watching it to make sure nothing's happening to it. But I would say, if you're first starting off, I would say 10% or 9%, 9 to 10% is a really safe way to, if you're not 100% sure what you're doing, but you want to remain safe, but you still kind of are itching to see the results of your ferment in maybe 3 months, I would say a 10% would be good.
Is that by weight, and is that kosher salt? Because I know different salts have different salt content.
Yeah. So anything just without sea salt, I use sea salt. I've been using sea salt from Whole Foods, the cheapest one that doesn't have iodine in it. So I've done that. I've used pink Himalayan salt. That's fine too. Just as long as it doesn't have iodine, you should be fine.
Okay. And it's by weight. So we're at least making that the
weight.
Okay. Wow. Luke has a great question for you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing made of koji? And I'm just going to tell you right now, you don't get to name 2. What's your favorite thing made of koji? I can whistle Jeopardy.
That's a tough question.
It's a really tough question. I would say that my favorite thing that I've made with koji is, a few of you guys have had it before. If you guys have been to Soma Camp, or I was kind of passing out samples last year at Soma Camp, but it's the koji beet charcuterie. That's when I grew.
So good.
Yeah, that was so good. I basically, you roast the beets, and then after you roast the beets, what you do with the koji beets or charcuterie is it's essentially koji grown on beets that's been dehydrated, and it kind of looks and tastes like prosciutto, similar to that. So the process is you would take these beets, you roast them, and then you boil them and then you roast them just to get them a little bit dry. And then what I used to do was I would brine them. I would brine them, and then after I brine them, I would get a paper towel, make sure they're really, really dry, and then go on and grow the spores on them. But it's such a tedious process. It's like a labor of love. And it's delicious, and it's my favorite thing, but I haven't made it in a while, truthfully, just because it takes so much monitoring and time and love. And that right now I'm really trying to grow this business, and I'm starting off with all of these more interesting, not more interesting ferments, but they just take a little bit less time. But the Koji beets are definitely my favorite thing to eat too. I've eaten like a little bit more than I should have, and then had to drink a lot of water because it's a little salty. So.
Yeah, they were stunning. They were so good.
amazing.
Yeah, they really blew our mind. Yeah. We have Ariana is saying, asking, I'm growing a lot of tomatoes in my garden. Do you have a tips for how I can use tomatoes with Koji?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. I would probably, what you can do with those tomatoes with Koji, that's pretty much an instant project. I would take Koji and make sure your tomatoes are like dehydrated or dry, and then pack that in with Koji rice. It doesn't have to be super dry. You just want to make sure it's not like fresh tomatoes. You want to get a little dehydrated there.
A little chewy, maybe?
Yeah, a little chewy. And then I would mix it with Koji and then kind of play with that and see. I think that would be really, really delicious, because tomatoes are really, really high in glutamic acid, or which is basically umami. So I think tomatoes have actually been on my mind too, because now that spring is really kicking in, and summer, it's like, oh my gosh, we will be getting an abundance of tomatoes at the farmer's market. So I'm also just trying to figure out, what I can do with the tomatoes.
It's like putting some umami into your umami there. That's a double bomb.
Yeah, and another thing you could probably do with the tomatoes, if you're into it, is you could probably turn them into vinegar, because tomatoes, you can juice all those tomatoes, and then tomatoes have some sugar in there, and if you mix it with Koji and you incubate it, what you're going to get is like this like really sugary Koji water, which then if you get like a fish bubbler or something like that, like an aerator, because what essentially is the whole process of Koji fermentation is that it starts off with Koji. If we're thinking about rice right now, it starts off with Koji, and then you can turn it into, the sweet rice water by basically combining Koji rice with more starch or more sugar, and basically a sugar source that you're feeding it. So you can have rice and then combine it. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. So what I'm trying to say is, traditionally sake is made with Koji rice, which then gets introduced to fresh source of starch, which is rice. And it eats up all of that starch in that fresh source of rice and turns that into sugar. And then from there, that sugar gets fermented into alcohol, and then which is sake. And then from there, it gets turned into rice vinegar. So what I'm trying to say with the tomatoes is that instead of that fresh source of starch that you're throwing in, instead of that, you can do tomatoes, because tomatoes will have some of that starch and that sugar, which then you can turn into a little bit of like a tomato alcohol, and then you can add lactic acid. You can add like a mother vinegar or something like that. I would do like apple cider vinegar just to kind of spur it, and then do like a fish bubbler, because really all you need is just some oxygen in there to kind of get that oxygenated, and then that will turn into vinegar. And an example of that, actually, I bought some earlier today or last week just to try. Let me see here. So Keep Well Vinegar is a company based out in the East Coast, and they made this amazing heirloom tomato vinegar that they used, that they made with leftover tomatoes and Koji, and they do like rice they do rice vinegars and soy sauces and things like that. But they're a huge inspiration to me because they're constantly trying to source local ingredients that are kind of going bad. Not like going bad, but secondary things that are getting tossed and turned around at the farmers markets, and they're having a harder time to sell. Farmers are, and so this company Keep Well goes in and buys all these things and sources from them, and then turns them into these interesting ferments. So
Great. Sounds like Ariana, you've got some ideas for your tomatoes now. I like those ideas.
Yeah.
I like good vinegars. George Doe says, I'm 1 month into my first ever miso and there's mold growing on the top of it. I'm pretty sure it's koji mold. Is there any way for me to take that koji mold and do something with it?
I mean, you could like use that. I mean, I don't really think you could do too much with it. I wouldn't. I usually just scrape that mold off. Of course, I'm pretty sure it's also koji mold. It usually is, especially if you have some salt in there. Nothing else there will grow besides the koji mold. But you could take it to try to propagate more koji. But is it worth it? Probably not. That you might not want on there. So
more of a science project than a outcome-based project. Then I'm guessing. I got two animal product questions for you. Elizabeth, she's back on the board, asking about what about dried or smoked fish?
Wow, that's an awesome question, Elizabeth. So I have not done that yet. There are traditional Japanese fermentation techniques with like something called katsubushi, which is basically like dried fish flakes, where they basically use koji to speed up the enzymes and make it super umami, and they cure it and they do all these things. It's almost like, and then this fish comes out and it's delicious. But I've not done that yet. Something that I have been thinking about doing is making fish sauce. But it's not with dried fish. I'm thinking about using it with like fish guts and things like that, similar to like, well, that's how they would do it in Vietnam anyways, is they use all of the little, the fish and the things that the parts that you wouldn't eat, like the guts and the head and all those little bones, and they mix it with koji, and koji's enzymes start breaking down all those things and turns it into fish sauce. So that's how traditionally it's been made, but I haven't ventured down that path yet. Last night though, I did, if some of you guys follow me on social media, I did do something with chicken bones though. So what I did was we got a chicken from the farmer's market, and we ate all of the chicken pretty much. And the chicken was already roasted, so I didn't have to do that. And then what I did was I took that carcass and I boiled it because I wanted to make, turn it into chicken broth. Like, I'm not going to waste all those yummy bones. So I turned it into chicken broth. And from there, I was thinking about tossing it, but I was like, you know what, let's do one experiment with this. So I'm not sure if this is going to work, but since the chicken was already roasted, the bones were already boiled, what I did was I just ran it through my KitchenAid grinder, my meat grinder, and I ground up all the bones. And what you see here is basically all the insides, the marrow of the bones in here. And then I mixed it with koji rice. So my measurements are right here. It's just even amounts of chicken scraps with koji rice. And I did 18% salt because we're talking about meat products here. So I wanted to make sure I was being extra safe. And then I'm going to just pray on this too. And we'll see where it goes. But,
Is that what's on the top of that?
So here it's the same thing. It's just, I put this little thing here with the plastic. I didn't put any salt here because I didn't have space, but we did salt the top very, very heavily, and just to make sure nothing else is going to get in there. And then when this looks like it's about to be good to to taste, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scrape off all that salt on the top and then dig in.
Okay, but
so
you
you could do that.
you had a plastic lid on it. Was it just not screwed in tight? Like you wouldn't like tighten that lid on it because then it would like blow up, right? Oh, we lost you.
No. So yeah, I mean, yes and no. So I usually just kind of keep it.
We kind of lost you there. I think you said you left it. Did you say you leave it on kind of loose?
Yeah.
Okay.
I left it a little loose. Yeah.
Okay.
I love that you can kind of Koji-fy anything and see what happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything is an experiment, you know, and just seeing how it goes. And I'm always just trying to think of how to minimize waste in a household, and really just, you know, like, why throw things away when you don't have to? You know, if this turns out really, really good, I could use that to cook down as, like, you know, soup stock even further, because all that marrow would translate into flavor. And I could use that to really, you know, either, you know, I think with the bones, I don't know if the bones will break down all the way. It might be a little bit gritty, but I think it would be good as a way to add flavor to a soup or something down the line, similar to a miso, because it's the exact same recipe as a miso, but instead of beans, I did chicken bones, you know?
Have you ever done something where it went through the process correctly, like it should have? It didn't mess up, and it was just gross. Like not because you messed it up, but you made it properly, and you're like, oh, this is disgusting. Who would eat this?
You know, to be honest with you, the answer is no. So I haven't, you know, okay, that's not true. A few times with the koji beets, and this is why I also kind of stopped doing it, was, you know, sometimes the beets have too much starch in there and there's a lot of sugar. And if I'm not monitoring the temperature right away, then what ends up happening is you pull it out of the incubation chamber and you don't see koji mold. What you see is self-destructed koji mold. And it's like this slimy beet. And it's not like it smells really bad.
I wasn't talking about that. I wasn't talking about where it messed up along the way. I meant like if you did it correctly as a gross. No, that's okay. If your science experiment goes bad, that's okay that it doesn't taste good.
Koji always tastes good, in other words, for the most part, if it's done right.
Yeah.
We'll see how that chicken bone koji turns out. We have one. I said we had 2 meat product questions. The other one asked, says you mentioned you can use koji with meats. Do you use it with dairy products such as cheese or a way to age cheese? That would be like fungus on fungus violence, wouldn't it?
You love that, Trent.
I do. It'd be like a lobster mushroom, but it'd be a koji cheese.
That's funny. So yes, I have done it with dairy before. I can show you guys something in my fridge. I'll have to look for it in a second, but I have cultured koji with yogurt before, and that's really good. If you do koji and yogurt, and you leave it out and salt it, it kind of tastes like ricotta cheese in a month or so. So that's really, really cool. I have
I bet you have some really cool, interesting stuff in your fridge.
I'd love to come hang out in your kitchen for a couple of hours and just get a tour.
Definitely. Yeah. I have these. So these are what I've made. I've been sharing them with some friends, but they are essentially a really young goat's milk cheese that I bought at the farmer's market. And you know how goat cheese usually has that really gamey taste to it. So I had combined this it was almost like a brie, you know, like a brie cheese essentially. And I mixed it with koji and I let it sit for 8 months, and it turned into this really thick paste. And what I ended up doing was just shaping them into balls, and then I just dehydrated it for a few days, and now it's like a Parmesan cheese flavor. Yeah, so that was kind of a fun experiment. But yeah, I think like the yogurt is a really good idea. Like doing that with yogurt is really, really fun, or like cream cheese, things like that, because the koji will end up happening is all those enzymes will start attacking all that fat and all of that protein. So if I was doing something like that, I would probably incubate my koji at like 80 degrees to kind of get the lipase and the protease going, and from there kind of let it sit there for a month or two, and then you can taste it as it goes, and you'll see that like your cream cheese or your yogurt or your ricotta cheese will turn into basically a very cheesy type of a sharp cheesy flavor, like similar to a Parmesan cheese that has been going for a year, which is really incredible. And it's a great way to use up your food scraps. If you have, things that are kind of going and you have a little bit of koji, you can always just pack it in a little jar, and it's a fun experiment. And then and then it tastes pretty good, so.
Yeah.
What would happen to?
Go ahead.
What would happen to a hard-boiled egg? Someone wants to know.
Oh, no, I haven't done that experiment yet, but maybe because I'm fearful of the sulfur smell that that Julie was talking about. I have worked with raw eggs before, so I've separated. I have an experiment going right now. It tastes. It's actually really interesting. What I did was I used the egg whites and combined it with koji and salt to kind of turn it in. It's kind of like soy sauce instead of beans and wheat and water and salt. What I did was egg whites and some salt and koji, because egg whites kind of have like a little bit of water in them anyways, and then I mixed it, and it kind of has like a floral citrusy smell to it right now. It doesn't taste like 100% great right now, but I think it's still a little bit too young. It's only been like a month or so, so maybe I'm gonna let that experiment sit out for a little bit. Something else that I've done that Nicole, my friend Nicole, taught me about over a year ago was basically taking egg yolks and letting them sit in some salt, just like curing an egg yolk, what you would think of curing an egg yolk. And then from there, taking it out and growing koji on it. And it really just tastes like an umami egg yolk. And I remember she had given me one a while ago, and I like really treasured it because it was so amazing. I was like, wow, it just kind of tastes like this cheesy egg yolk thing. So that's kind of a really cool experiment you can do.
Did you slice it? Did it get hard, like a round yolk, and you could slice it?
I grated it with like a cheese.
Oh, wow.
Grater. Yeah. Oh. So that's really, really good.
Wow. I so many things that I think we want to try. We are kind of running into our time limit here. We have another question or two. One is a little more technical from Brian Chow. Asks, is there a pH range that is acceptable for koji fermentation?
I read a science journal a while ago. I can't remember where, but I'm sure if you Google it, you can find it. But it said that the koji really likes to be in a 7 to 7.7 pH level, which is pretty neutral, I think. And then the optimal, and that's when it's like most active and stable. But if you really, really want it to like go, I actually wouldn't know, to be honest with you. So, I haven't really measured my pH levels, to be honest with you guys. I mean, what I do is I go mostly on like feel and smell and taste. So if it feels good, if the texture is good, it's not super liquidy, and it tastes really good and it smells good, then I'm good, So I haven't messed a lot, that would be actually really interesting to know though, because I did read a paper about, that 7 to 7.7 kind of pH range, but I really was like, that's a cool piece of information. I'm going to tuck that behind my brain. Don't know when I'll use it, but I probably will in the future when I get really technical, but I haven't yet had to do that. So.
Okay, fair enough. I think that was it for the questions. Do you want to show us a few of the products you have available right now?
Yeah. So, I have certain things, like I have spores. I have like, traditional misos if you guys want to just get that. But I also have more exciting ones like, the cashew one that I was talking about. I don't know how many more I have of this. I'll have to check, but I've been making a lot of mushroom misos. They've been selling really, really quickly. Maybe because all my friends that have been supporting me so far have been in the mushroom community. I made this awesome maitake chickpea one that everybody
yum.
really seems to
They've
enjoy.
won for us.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah, I definitely will.
Put our name on that one.
Yeah, this one is made with organic maitake mushrooms from Mycopia here, this one actually is actually from Far West Fungi. So Far West Fungi, I actually work for them part-time right now as I'm starting this business up, and they grow these mushrooms with like chickpeas, organic chickpeas, and I have the farm next to everything, the source that I'm getting them from. I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, and then I have. And actually one thing that I just pulled that tasted really good was I have the shiitake. I haven't packaged it yet, but it's a shiitake miso that I'll definitely send to you guys for you to try. And that's just really, really, really good.
How long did you cook those? I mean, you know what I mean, not cook,
Yeah,
but how long did those run fermenting?
how many
so
months?
those ones, I did 8% salt for about a month. So my ferments are quite short because I'm constantly monitoring them. I'm not sure as when I scale this business, like, how much babying I need to do. Maybe then I need to put more salt to ensure that it's good. I've had a few times where the miso has kind of gotten a little bit alcoholic or yeasty. And that's because there's a lot of yeast in the air. And I just didn't have enough salt in there, really. And at that point, I wouldn't call that miso a wash because it has more of like a sake flavor to it. Mm-hmm. So what I did with that batch of miso was I recommended folks cook it with seafood, because if you wanted to do like a sake marinade, on your salmon, or reducing it down with some clams or shellfish, kind of like similar to white wine, but using the miso with the sake notes in it to cook, cook your vegetables in and stuff like that. That was really, really good. But, typically you would think that, most people would say like a sake flavor is an off note. And it is in traditional senses, but I've cooked with it and it's been a really pleasant surprise because it's kind of like, instead of using white wine, I have a alcoholic kind of taste to my greens and things like that, which I really like, to be honest with you.
So what is this? Is this art or is this science?
I think it's both, and mostly passion. We came out with some of these really cool soy sauce kits too that we are sending out to folks that are interested. We're selling this for $25, and it comes with instructions and things like that. And we have some gluten-free varieties as well. But they're basically ferment your own soy sauce kits. Once you get them, you basically have to stir it as every day or as much as you can remember. Because it's alive, you want to make sure it's, it comes with a muslin cloth, so you just rubber band that over, and then you can put the lid on loosely over it. And as you're stirring, I always taste the spoon, and it just gets better over time. When you get the kit though, you can obviously like taste it and eat and see, and it's already delicious. But it's a fun little experiment to see it go from that to basically all of the koji on the beans, basically eating all of that protein and then digesting all of those beans, and it just liquefies over time. And I've had a lot of fun watching mines go from, when I first, like these ones here, I just made yesterday. So all these beans are fully intact, but I have one I have a batch going in a big bucket that I'm not going to pull because I can't show it anyways. But basically it looks like a bean slurry, you know, because all that koji is eating all those beans and it's liquefying those beans and digesting them. And then from there, you know, at the end of 6 months, what you're supposed to get is like, you know, a really refined kind of fermented bean mash water that you then strain to make your own soy sauce. Or, you know, you basically
6 months.
Soy sauce. Yeah,
it's a 6 month process.
Yeah.
Kristen, if we start now, that could be our Christmas gifts this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody
definitely.
likes soy sauce, right?
Yeah. I think it's really fun too when you're making it yourself because you feel a little bit more involved in the process, and you know, it's like exciting, and it's not like a sourdough starter where you have to feed it all the time. It's everything is in there and all you have to do is stir. So it's a little bit less maintenance in a sense, but you still have to stir it. So
okay. I think we're going to wrap here. We have one more question to answer that kind of to come back, and it was about the incubation chamber. What did you use and at what temperature? Now for the chamber itself, we're going to send out the email after this that has pictures of the Broad and Taylor bread proofer and the Tribest Sedona dehydrator.
Yeah.
So we'll send that out. Larkin asked that question. What about the temp? Do you want to just real quick run through that again? I know we did. But...
Yeah. So I would just start at 86 degrees. I feel like that's a really safe bet because if your koji gets too hot and it itself incubates to 95, you're still going to be safe. You know, it's still going to be fine. But if you start off with a higher temperature and then maybe it overheats and then you've basically self-destructed your koji. Or if you're doing it at like 70 degrees and then it maybe, you know, it's not hot enough and it's not going. And so I think 86 is typically a very, very safe temperature to kind of get started in. And the nice thing about the Broad and Taylor, or, you know, the dehydrator that I had put in that little pamphlet that you're going to send out is simply because there is a temperature monitor on it. And it's all programmed in there. But, you know, if you don't have any of those things, like I said, you know, you could do it with a hot water bottle. You could do it on top of your fridge because your fridge is constantly cooling. So there's hot air being pushed out in the back. So you can do that, put it on top of your refrigerator where that vent is. You can put it near a heating vent in your house if you have central heat and air conditioning, and monitor it like that. Or you could put it in your oven. If you have an oven with a pilot light on, maybe, you know, you can incubate your koji in there, but maybe just make sure that door is kept slightly ajar so that there's fresh air that's getting exchanged and it's not getting too hot. But all of those options, you know, I would definitely test with a thermometer first to make sure that, you know, you are getting 86, you know, that range of like, you know, 80 to like 95 degrees.
But that's just for that first step.
Yeah.
That's for the rice, to run the koji through the rice. After that, you keep it at a room temperature.
Yeah.
During the month long or 6 month long process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, good. All right. Elena, stay on, or we'll go, but you and I'll catch up on Messenger so we can get the information out to everybody via email as soon as we can afterwards.
Great.
Thank you so much for sharing your passion with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was an awesome and great opportunity, and I'm so very thankful that you guys decided to do this. And you know, and you guys were great. Yeah,
well, thanks. I think you're going to be so successful at this. It's so cool. Thanks. Cool. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.